They, Them, Their. A Guide to Non-Binary and Genderqueer Identities by Eris Young. Copyright 2020. Published by Jessica Kingsley Publishers. Read by Scandal. Trigger warnings. Dear reader, throughout this book you will find discussions of gender dysphoria and its effects, of non-consensual sex and gender assignment, and occasional mention of coercive surgical interventions made against people with non-normative gender or sexual presentations. I make mention several times throughout the book of myths, misconceptions, and bad faith media portrayals of trans, genderqueer, and non-binary people that some readers may find difficult to read about. Also discussed throughout is violence, a fact of life faced by trans people all over the world. This includes discussion of the statistics surrounding physical assault, murder, and sexual violence towards trans people, and in-depth descriptions of institutional and non-physical violence, non-consensual outing of people as trans, genderqueer, or non-binary, as well as misgendering, the erasure of our identities, systematic inequalities in spheres such as work and housing, and gatekeeping of trans people's access to medical treatment. Certain chapters and sections may be difficult to read for specific reasons. In Chapter 4, On Community, there is an in-depth discussion of TERF, trans-exclusionary radical feminist, and radfem ideologies, and there are discussions in Chapters 4 and 5 of hostility faced by trans and non-binary people from within the LGBT community. Chapter 5, On Our Experiences in Wider Society, includes some discussion of family and romantic partner rejection and domestic abuse, as well as of sex and relationships and the potential difficulties therein for genderqueer people. Chapters 6 and 7 are devoted to discussions of non-binary and genderqueer people's experiences of mental health and medicine, respectively. Both chapters discuss the pathologization of trans and genderqueer identities, as well as the harm caused by conversion therapy and the historical institutionalization of individuals with non-normative identities. This is also discussed briefly in the statistics and demographics sections of the first chapter. Chapter 6 also discusses in some depth my own and my interviewees' specific experiences with mental illnesses like depression and anxiety, as well as statistics surrounding suicidality and substance abuse linked to gender dysphoria and minority stress. Anecdotes in Chapter 7 and to a lesser extent Chapter 6 discuss in detail specific instances of traumatic experiences with medical professionals, including a description of one of my own early traumatic experiences with a doctor, lasting for several paragraphs. Chapter 7 gives cursory descriptions of some surgical options for trans and non-binary people. Chapter 8 is devoted to discussion of our experiences with laws and the legal system, and as such includes discussions of experiences with the police, statistics, and some specific anecdotes recounting domestic abuse. I hope that those of you who need it find this warning helpful, and I urge you to skip over or approach in your own time sections or chapters which you might find difficult or traumatic to read. Thank you for reading on. Eris. Chapter 1. An Introduction to Non-Binary and Genderqueer Issues. Introduction. The purpose of this book is to introduce readers to the concepts, contexts, and daily struggles of non-binary identified and genderqueer people. People whose gender identities lie outside of the simple binary of male and female. We're a distinct social group existing within the larger transgender and LGBTQ communities, with our own set of vulnerabilities and privileges. Non-binary people are becoming more and more visible every day in movies, TV shows, books, and no longer just science fiction, and the news, on the runway, even in schools and workplaces. Several celebrities, including Jaden Smith, Amanda Stenberg, and Miley Cyrus, have come out as trans or at least gender nonconforming in some way. Activist Maria Munir came out as non-binary to President Barack Obama during a London town hall meeting in 2016. Our sudden visibility has come with some backlash. Genderqueer people have faced harassment, public ridicule, and even violence from people who refuse to accept or try to understand us. But there have also been people willing to listen, to whom our gender identities are not unnatural or impossible, but simply another one of the complexities which make us human. This book is for those people, the people who want to understand but might not yet have the means to do so. Most non-binary people find the community through the internet. I did, and I found a vast majority of my interviewees through the internet as well. The terminology we use to describe ourselves, rooted conceptually in queer theory and the work of Judith Butler and Michael Foucault, crystallized not in the classroom or in community meetings, but on websites like LiveJournal and Tumblr. Most of it isn't standardized. Self-applied terminology rarely is when it develops organically. Information about us, who we are, what the terms mean, how we differ from various other gender and sexual minorities, can be found on the internet by anyone with a mind to learn, but it is often contradictory or at least inconsistent. These websites can be hard to find, and while simply Googling genderqueer will get you some good sites written by actual genderqueer people, it will also get you a litany of shock value, hate-mongering, misery memoir articles, which are rarely written by the people they're about. I don't claim to be a master theorist or even an expert on the subject of non-binary and genderqueer identities. Any authority vested in this book derives from statistics, extensive anecdotal evidence gathered from the community itself, and a lifetime of personal experience. I will try to set out as clearly as possible the terminology you need to know to talk about and fully understand our gender identities, and illustrate some of the most common obstacles we face while navigating society at large. These barriers take many forms. After all, we're trying to live our lives outside of, or in opposition to, one of the oldest and most ossified systems in human history: gender. Many domains, marriage, fashion, even language, are often rendered fully binarized, with no room left over for people who don't fit either label. In addition, I believe that in today's culture of public shaming and virtue signaling, there can be fear associated with getting it wrong, which has perhaps hindered public willingness to learn and explore. I believe that every binary gendered person should be given the chance to try and understand, and that it is inevitable that they should make mistakes. After all, we grow up in this system. It's like water to fish for us. It's a big job to get your head above water and break habits that have been drilled into us since birth. We of the non-binary community should know this best of all. On the other hand, being genderqueer can be exhausting. Because most people aren't readily equipped to understand our identities, we are constantly having to explain ourselves, our genders, and our gender presentations. We get stares, invasive questions, and even mockery daily, and this has led, quite reasonably, to the mentality among many of us that it is not our job to educate people outside our community. This is perfectly true, and it is why I feel privileged to have the energy and ability to explain on behalf of others. Again, I don't claim to be an authority. I don't doubt I will get some things wrong, and I will happily correct any that are brought to my attention. My definitions are not the only ones. The identity terms I discuss are not the only valid ones. But I do believe that it is my duty to give what I can back to the community, and that begins with this book. As such, in addition to discussing my own experiences as a non-binary person, I'll be making extensive use throughout this book of surveys and studies conducted by individuals and third sector organizations like Stonewall and the Scottish Trans Alliance, as well as anecdotal evidence from a number of non-binary and genderqueer people who have been so kind as to act as interviewees and share their experiences with me. Throughout this book, I will refer to these interviewees by their initials, or by a numbered XX if they prefer to remain fully anonymous. The average age of my interviewees was 26. Mode were 24 and 23, 3 people each. My oldest interviewee was 45, next oldest 32, and the youngest 20. I didn't ask my interviewees about ethnicity and race, as the questionnaire I used was meant to be more of a prompt for anecdotal evidence than an exhaustive demographic survey, but roughly speaking, the majority of my interviewees were white British or white American, Latino, AX, American, and East or Southeast Asian American. In this and in the chapter on language, Chapter 2, I will explain the most common terminology used in the non-binary community and discuss the ways English and a few other languages accommodate, or have adapted to accommodate, non-binary identities. There have always been people who exist outside of the binary of male and female. Many cultures extant today have an established third or other gender category, and there have been documented cases throughout human history of people who consider themselves neither, both, or multiple genders. These will be discussed in the chapter on the history of non-binarism, Chapter 3. The chapter on law, Chapter 8, will discuss the legal position of genderqueer people, mainly in terms of human rights, equality monitoring, and official documentation, as well as in the light of upcoming changes to the Gender Recognition Act, the UK's most pertinent piece of gender-related legislation. In the chapters on relationships, Chapter 4, existing in wider society, Chapter 5, mental health, Chapter 6, and medicine, Chapter 7, I'll talk about what it's like to be genderqueer, the different ways we navigate the minefield of social interaction, the ways our identities can interact with our mental health, and the barriers and pitfalls we encounter when trying to obtain mental health and medical treatment. These chapters will also contain advice for binary gendered people, doctors, counselors, and teachers who want to know how best to support us in these environments. Chapter 9 will briefly discuss some of my hopes for the future of the non-binary and genderqueer community. Finally, there will be a chapter, Chapter 10, listing the sources used in this book, and a list of resources, enlightening books, websites, and authors for readers, binary gendered and not, who want to go further. Who are we? The actual concept of gender queerness and gender non-binarism, broad terms of identity with which this book is concerned, and which I will use largely interchangeably, are a bit abstract. They interact with and draw influence from a whole range of other identities and various areas of gender and social theory. I always find that the more abstract a concept, the more I need to see its effect on the real world for it to make sense. This is probably why I'm not a philosopher. In that sense, perhaps the best way to start this chapter, and the book proper, is to try to sketch for you what my life as a person who identifies as non-binary looks like from day to day. Ways in which it differs from the lives of people who aren't non-binary, and ways in which it doesn't. In this way, throughout the book, I hope to temper the abstract theoretical concepts and dry statistics with examples from my life and from the lives of others I've known and spoken to. I can't think of one single thing that fundamentally differentiates the way I live my life from someone who isn't non-binary. I think we're all more similar than we are different, but there are a few things you might notice as you get to know me. My clothes, my voice, and the structure of my face, after years of hormone replacement therapy, are such that I get called sir and ma'am in about equal measure. I get tense when I sense a pronoun or gendered word coming up in a sentence. These words are the weather vane by which I gauge how I'm being perceived, but I try to react as little as possible. The receptionist at the dentist today, when explaining my question to her colleague, simply skipped over the her or his, leaving the word out of her sentence. I don't like to encourage the use of either one. They, them is my preferred pronoun, and I like to see what people do. Will they decide on a pronoun, skip a word, or even use the neutral pronoun I actually like to go by? I still waver between answering to either pronoun or to neither. I've got a floppy, hipstery haircut and a bit of a mustache that I'm trying to cultivate. I usually dress in clothes that the fashion industry deems unisex, though they tend to come from the men's section. When I go out, if I'm not at work, I try to play around a bit. I wear heels, suits, sack dresses, esoteric jewelry, though I think I'll always be rubbish at applying makeup. My New Year's resolution for 2018 was to be more femme. What I'm trying to say with all of this is that these are all ways by which I try to outwardly express an aspect of my personhood that I was never really given the tools to explore. When I say I'm non-binary, that's a single word, like the visible part of an iceberg, being used to express a whole load of stuff underneath. It's complex, and I'm still now trying to fully understand it. It has a palpable effect on my everyday life, on the way others perceive and treat me. To put it very simply, my non-binary gender identity means that I am neither a man nor a woman. Neither label describes me. I don't feel comfortable with the gender I was assigned at birth, but neither am I simply transgender, desiring to move from one end of a polarity to another. I'm not comfortable being a he or she in the third person. I like my friends and colleagues to simply refer to me as they or simply by my name. To dig a bit deeper, I feel that the idea of expressing myself just as a man or just as a woman would be to erase an essential part of who I am. I certainly don't begrudge anyone else their gender. Contrary to some popular opinion, non-binary people don't want to ban gender, if such a thing were even possible. But I find I'd much rather think of myself in terms of my writing, ability, my love of cooking, the fears and ambitions I have for the future, than whether I'm male or female. If I could, I'd give up gender entirely. I'd slough it off like an old skin and throw it away and just be me. But in order to leave gender behind, and I don't know if I'll ever entirely manage this, I've had to think about nothing but gender for a very long time. I've had to unlearn a lot of social conditioning, a lot of unspoken rules that were taught to me over the course of my life. I've had to endure a lot of scrutiny and felt more than a little anxiety and fear over the course of my transition. Who am I? I have a biography that reads like that of a lot of the gender-diverse people I know. I realized as a child that there was something not quite right about the way I was encouraged to act, to dress, to speak, to play by the people around me. I could see that different people played different roles according to who they were, but the role it seemed I was being asked to play didn't match who I was. Did everyone feel this way sometimes? Would I grow out of it? My parents, both fairly progressive, didn't try to force me into any traditionally gendered activities as a child. If I disliked wearing makeup, it was because I don't like stuff on my face. If I didn't like sports, it's because I was a bit lazy, though having to use gendered changing rooms certainly didn't help. I think that somewhat ironically, because of this childhood freedom, my transition began a bit later than it might have in a more conservative household. It was a long time before I realized the discomfort I felt in department stores, restrooms, the doctor's office, filling out my passport application at the DMV was connected to my gender. It was even longer before I realized that there was anything I could do about it. When I was a bit younger, still exploring the possibilities of alternative gender expression, the idea of having to use a gendered restroom, to commit myself in view of others to gents or ladies and face scrutiny, ridicule, or even violence in either one, was a constant source of stress. I'd try to steer my group of friends to places that had unisex toilets, or even to avoid using the restroom at all when I went out. This seems like a bit of a silly thing to worry about, but it had a palpable impact on my social life. This is one of a million tiny daily trials that affect a majority of trans people. One study at the UCLA Williams Institute found that of the 93 trans survey respondents, 54% reported health problems due to avoiding public restrooms, including dehydration, UTIs, and kidney problems. My discomfort in public gendered spaces, the threat of mockery, and other sources of constant stress took their toll on me, as they do on many of us. I grew up anxious, insomniac, depressed, and even now maintaining my mental health is a chore that takes daily, concerted effort. These days, I'm a little less stressed about what restroom to use, how I look, and what people call me. I'm lucky enough to live in a place where hate crimes are relatively rare, and I've learned to ignore stares, getting misgendered, called the wrong name or pronoun, or rude remarks. They reflect less on me than they do on the people that make them. No matter what I'm wearing or how I feel, I generally keep my head high and I try to project confidence, and usually no one questions me. I feel now, though I didn't always, that I have a right to exist. But this confidence is born over a decade of self-doubt, anxiety, and depression. It's taken years to build a thick enough skin and become self-aware enough to explore my gender publicly and without apology, and it often seems like there is very little standing between me and regression back into my wretched, pre-transition state. As much as I want to say it's possible to exist as a happy, healthy, genderqueer person in today's society, the reality is a bit more complex. It's true that now, today, this very minute, is better for us than the minute that came before it. We are more visible. We've got more explicit legal rights than we ever have before, and we're gradually watching the world around us begin to think of gender in a more nuanced way. But just living is still quite often very difficult. We're still trans, and as such, we still face violence and rejection from our friends and families, and we still must navigate in public spaces not designed to accommodate us. There is hope, however. It is visible genderqueer celebrities and public figures, social and legal acknowledgement of our existence, and I hope books like this one that will make our day-to-day lives better. This preview has been created for you by License Scandal Lit. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more quality book previews. Thank you!